make sure I don't mute myself here. All right, so let's start again. This is Liz Warren with the National TPP team. I'm Director of Communications and Campaign Outreach for People Demanding Action, which is a PDA C4 organization. A little bit about the meeting room tonight. If you are in the meeting room, you can probably see that on the left-hand side there's a lovely conversation going on in our chat room. If you have a question for a member of the host team, one of the guest speakers, or one of your fellow attendees, feel free to use that chat feature. You just click in the lower left-hand corner where it says type your message. Once you finish typing, just click send, and someone will answer you. That way nobody has to just sit there and listen without being able to communicate. After the meeting, we share the PowerPoint as well as the meeting notes and a link to the recording on the Global TPP Team Facebook page. We also share it on the People Demanding Action site, and we will share links with you after the call. I'd now like to very briefly introduce our call host team. Tom Hawking is our National Call Technical Advisor. You can reach him at twhawking@gmail.com. And I'm going to just invite Tom to just say a quick hello. I'm going to unmute him for a second. Say hi, Tom. Unless you've muted yourself, I guess. We can skip ahead. Right, Tom's agreed not to take up time talking because I told him we had a tight schedule tonight. So thank you, Tom. Oh, there he is. Okay. You're with us, Tom? So anybody has a tech question? Okay.
And I've been dealing with people's questions in the chat room, and hopefully I'll be providing you with good, helpful answers. In the meantime, I'm just going to be quiet and enjoy the call with the rest of you.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom.
Avi? I get back tonight.
Someone has a question. I think we've got okay. I'm going to go ahead and mute the rest of our host team for now until it's their time. Mara Cohen is our chat host along with Lisa Oldendorf. Mara is also part of our call planning team, and she's with PDA's mass criminalization team and part of the Global Climate Convergence. Mara is also a organizer in the state of Illinois. Lisa Oldendorf is our other chat host, and if you've noticed, Lisa and Mara are both sharing information with everybody in the chat room. If you have a question, you can reach out to either of them. Their email addresses are on the slide, and again, we will be sharing this PowerPoint with you afterwards, so you'll have everyone's contact information. Mara, if you'd like to say, I'm going to meet you.
Yeah, hi. Sorry I was kicked out of the chat box for a few minutes, but I'm back, and I will help out as best I can.
Great. Thank you so much, Mara. All right, Lisa, would you like to say hi to everyone? You're unmuted unless you muted yourself.
Yes, I did. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Just a note, for some reason, I can't copy and paste into the chat box, but I'll be a little slower, so I'll have to hand type everything in. But I will be on it.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks to everybody for sharing so far. All right. I'd also like to introduce Liz Amston. Liz is our National Call Team co-organizer. She handles the post-meeting notes along with Jan Schwarzenberger and is a Move On Council organizer in Los Angeles, California. You can reach her at lizamston@hotmail.com. Liz, if you are with us, feel free to say hello. I don't think I muted you. I asked everybody to mute themselves, and so now I'm inviting them to jump in, but I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead. I'm sure Liz will type a note in the chat box to everybody if she's with us. And Jan Schwarzenberger is the person responsible for those wonderful notes that you see along with Liz. She captures everything that's on the call and shares with us all the links. I would also like to mention that our call note team and the folks that put together the report, part of the reason it takes them such a long time is that they always vet the links and double check for you all the latest information that is important to include in this report. So a big thanks to them for all that hard work. Thanks again. Now I'd like to introduce Harriet Haywood. Harriet is the National Call Team co-organizer. She is also a Move On regional organizer in the state of Florida, and she works very hard at helping us plan future calls. Harriet, if you're with us, jump in and say hello.
I would really like to thank Lori, John, and Ben for coming on the call, and also to Eleanor Goldfield. Thanks very much. If you didn't get that first part, I wanted to really heartily thank Liz. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Harriet. All right. Next, I'd like to introduce Linda Brewster. Linda is a regional organizer for Move On in the state of Washington and covers most of the other states in the Pacific Northwest. She is new to our call planning team, but has been an organizer for some time now and is very actively working to stop TPP in her part of the country. Linda?
Hi, everybody. I'm looking forward to being on the call and learning more about this really important issue.
Thanks so much, Linda. All right, now I'd like to invite Adam Weissman with Trade Justice and Global Justice for Animals and the Environment to say hi. You'll notice that we've got all of Adam's actions that are coming up this coming week on this slide. We will share that with you after the call. We don't have time to review them, but they are up there along with live links. So if you are in the chat room right now, you can scroll up to the top and you can actually download the PowerPoint and have them right in front of you. Adam, I'm sure, will be providing us with some additional information that we will share after the call. Adam, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. And yes, I'm actually adding new events to our website calendar right at this moment, so I'll post them in the chat box as well. But thanks for joining us, and let's have a great call.
Great. And so everyone can find those new things also at that main link, the tradejustice.net/315.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should be there in about 3 minutes, actually.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Adam. All right, at this time I'd like to introduce Emily Ann Slayton, Director of Social Media with TPP Media March. For those of you who've been with us for some time, you probably know that Emily Ann has been planning the TPP Tuesday Twitter storms, but beyond that, she's been reaching out globally to try and put together a very cohesive social media effort that goes well beyond Twitter itself, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about that later, but now she's probably going to tell us what we're doing on Tuesday. Emily Ann? I think you're unmuted. You should be unmuted. I'm going to double check and make sure that we didn't accidentally mute her. Okay.
Hear me? You got me?
We can hear you.
Okay.
You are unmuted. The mic is open for you. Welcome.
So everybody, this is our link on the bottom here, tiny.cc/TPP Media March. For everyone new on the call, what we do is we go to that link on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 Pacific, and you'll see a tweet list of 40 tweets. We copy and paste one by one each tweet and tweet them out all at the same time. So please try it. This is the theme this week. We're going to take advantage of some college basketball, March Madness. So these are all big corporations, and these are actual numbers. And they're playing each other to see who will win the most money and an investment state dispute case. So, we'll see who's going to go to the Final Four. Looks like they got some pretty big money here on the board. So join us on Tuesday night as we play March Madness, hashtag March Madness, and we will also, of course, have our hashtag No Fact Check for our storm on Tuesday. So great. Does anyone have any social media questions? I've been told that I could take some questions tonight. Or please, you can always reach out to me privately too. I'll put my email here. We don't take everyone's time tonight. Please, I'll help you. I help everybody get onto Twitter, set up your account, make sure you have your bio and your photo, and make sure you're just friendlier for people to follow you, and join our storms on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And we do have about 3 minutes that we've set aside. So if anyone has a question about social media, the Twitter storms, or anything else for Emily Ann, please press *6 on your phone at this time, and we will call on you because we do have a couple minutes for her to answer questions. So just press *6. Any social media questions or Twitter questions for Emily Ann Slayton? Press *6. All right. We have a hand up at 469-478-0750. Could you let us know who you are and where you are?
I'm on a cell phone, so hopefully you can hear me clearly. My name is Scott Taylor, known and attended these calls. I live north of Dallas and Texas currently. And my question is, can you hear me okay? I don't know if you want to.
We can hear you. You're in Texas, and your question for Emily Ann Sladen is?
Well, how do you get comfortable, organized or do this social media like Twitter and things? I'm trying to trying to get comfortable with this technology, this new way to convey ideas and thoughts. And I sort of feel lost when I talk about Twitter forums and things of that nature.
Okay. And what's your first name?
My first name is Scott. I've been in calls now and then,
Okay, Scott. Okay, so Emily Ann, you want to tell Scott how to get comfortable on social media or what he needs to do?
Sure, absolutely. It's really important to make your profile as friendly as possible so that when new people find you or see one of your tweets, they can make up their mind, oh, that looks like a nice guy. I'd like to follow him. So make sure you just put a nice picture, or it can even be, if you don't want to put your own picture, you can put like a no TPP picture or a picture of anything, a picture of your dog or something, and just fill out your bio. Dad of 3 wonderful children, loves hiking, concerned about food safety and TPP. You know what I mean? Just fill something out so that you make your profile a friendly place. And then people will see your tweets because you're going to use hashtags in your tweets, and your hashtags will be a link to all the other hashtags, for no fast track or whatever. And people will find your tweets, and they'll go check out your profile page to see if they like you and if they want to follow you for more information. So, yeah, I think it's really intimidating at first, but I think that social media can be really fun, especially Twitter, because it's so quick, and it's not, you don't have to worry about making a big post like on Facebook. It's 140 characters or less, and it's fun. So reach out to me privately, because I can work with you to make you more comfortable on Twitter. Okay?
Thanks, Sam. We're at the time when we were out of questions, but
yeah,
go ahead and
let
I'll let one more person ask a question. If maybe we can give a short answer or direct them somewhere too. We've got here 815-409-1187. So go ahead. We have time for one more short question. Let us know who you are, where you are, and what you'd like to know from Emily Ann Sladen. Area code 815-409. You're up. Okay, we have a shy person. All right. Well, I think what we're going to do, I apologize to everyone who's in the queue. You're welcome. I think Emily Ann's going to stay with us on the call. Are you not, Em?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe during Q&A, I'm going to go ahead and clear this message queue for now, and those of you who have social media questions, we'll try and give you an opportunity to ask them again after the main speaker portion of the call. So we are going to have a little time for Q&A at the end. So clear the queue, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker. And that is our guest, Eleanor Goldfield, creative activist and amazing individual. I visited her page, heartkillingapathy.org. She is also involved with Backbone Campaign and the Rolling Rebellion, which is a cooperative effort with Backbone, Popular Resistance, and Occupy. And I'm just going to say, take it away, Eleanor, and tell us everything we need to know.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. So basically, I just want to speak a little bit about Rolling Rebellion real fast. Rolling Rebellion is, as she said, a collaborative effort between Backbone Campaign, Popular Resistance, and Occupy.com. And the goal of Rolling Rebellion is to create high visibility actions that are creative and artful. Basically using things like street theater, lighting boards, banner drops, projections, costumes, and things like that to promote a message of social and political change. And the Rolling Rebellion started last year in July. And right now we're focusing on the TPP and Fast Track, which is why I'm joining you guys today during this call. So what we're doing right now is we have a lot of actions that have been going on since February, projections, sit-ins, and things like that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to coordinate with all these different groups that are doing actions, like all of you guys. They're doing actions in regards to TPP and Fast Track. and not only invite you to start doing your own creative actions, but help facilitate those by either supplying you with like lighting gobos, or putting you in touch with lighting brigades that might already be in your area, letting you know about creative actions that are already happening, and sort of facilitate these creative actions, and also just give you some ideas. If you go to the site rollingrebellion.org, there's a list of sample actions, everything from dressing up as bankers and things like that to lighting brigades. So that's the concept behind the Rolling Rebellion. Basically born from the idea that art is such a great way of reaching people. It's non-confrontational at its core, but you can deal with any confrontational and complex issues in a creative way that engages people as well as it educates them. So that's the idea of Rolling Rebellion. And as a side, I also do a TV show for Occupy.com weekly, and I've been highlighting these actions, these creative actions on the show, and also passing them on to other people in media and press, alternative media. So that's the other thing about these actions, is that they get more press through alternative media by looking cool and sounding cool or what have you. So that's another added bonus of working within the Rolling Rebellion. So yeah, I just wanted to get on the call and invite you guys to check out rollingrebellion.org. And obviously, I believe my contact information is up here, and I would love to help get you guys plugged into the Rolling Rebellion and help you facilitate actions in your areas and connect you with action brigades that might already be out there. So that's pretty much that.
Hey, thank you so much, Eleanor. We've got a couple minutes, so if anyone has a question for Eleanor Goldfield about the Rolling Rebellion, feel free to press *6 on your phone. We've got time for probably 2 questions, and then we can also put you in touch. And Eleanor, if you're not in the meeting room, I will let you know that we've got all your contact information up there, including your other website, artkillingapathy.org, and your Twitter and Facebook links and all of the URLs. So we've got Karen. Karen has a hand up. Karen, go ahead and ask Eleanor your question. Karen, are you with us? Area code 610. It comes up as Karen. Area code 610-678. Maybe you've muted yourself, but you are unmuted here. We have unmuted Karen at area code 610. So if you'd like to ask a question, Karen. Oh, Karen is obviously shy. If anyone else has a question, press *6 on your phone. If not, Eleanor, if you'd like to share anything with us, anything else with us, you're free to do so.
Well, yeah, just also that the sample actions that are up on Rolling Rebellion are examples. There's a lot of things that aren't up there that people have done. Last summer, my band did a show with activist Canadian Lee Camp as part of the Rolling Rebellion, and we worked with Occupy Venice, and it was a whole multimedia, very cool party event that raised money for working within Occupy Venice and their issues. So really, there's no end to the creative ways that you can use the concept of creative and artful activism. And Backbone Campaign is willing to help facilitate these creative actions, and because they really do get much more media attention when you do something sort of outrageous like dressing up or doing street theater. It really does get a lot of attention. So Backbone Campaign is willing to even put a little bit of money into facilitating these actions for you guys and with you guys. So I really would recommend that you guys check out the site Rolling Rebellion, as you can see on the site there. And please feel free to contact me with any questions if you can't think of them right now. I would love to help you come into the Rolling Rebellion fold.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. All right. Well, then I'm going to just move us on. Our next speaker for tonight is our friend and ally Celeste Drake, Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist with the AFL-CIO. Celeste, as many of you know, wrote along with Lori Wallach a really great piece last week debunking some of the claims on the propaganda call we all were talking about. She's going to share us a little bit with that about that happening in D.C. Celeste?
Hi, Liz. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being on the call. Basically, folks should know that we're expecting the fast track bill to be introduced on April 13th, and that's assuming that Biden makes a deal with Hatch as expected, and so now's a really great time to continue to put pressure on Senator Wyden throughout the state of Oregon to make sure that he, continues to have in the front of his mind how uncomfortable this is going to be for him and how uncomfortable we're all going to make it for him and how uncomfortable it's going to be for his reelection campaign. There was a call, I don't know if anyone here on the phone sat in on it, that Organizing for America did, to basically say, fast track isn't fast track, it's really slow, TPP is awesome. And they told a lot of sort of silly half-truths or things that were completely irrelevant to the debate. And we have put out some, answers to those questions just to make clear for everyone who is interested, because a lot of people do want to know about the facts and do want to know more. And I think Liz either did send those out or is going to send those out. But it's important for folks, not that you have to become a policy wonk and know every detail, but familiarize yourself with some of the things the pro side is saying, which after you sort of read the debunks, you'll realize it's actually common sense. They're trying to deny 20 years of history of what corporate power deals have done, and the answers are pretty clear, and we live it every day. So we just need to remember to do our best to turn more people onto this debate and get involved, because the next 6 or 8 weeks are going to be really, really critical.
Thanks so much, Celeste. And if anybody has a question for Celeste Drake, we've got time for about one or two. Press *6 on your telephone, and we will call on you, and you can ask Celeste Drake a AFL-CIO question. It gives folks a second to react if anybody has a question for Celeste. Okay, we have a hand up at area 206-763-3124. Go ahead. You're up.
Hi, Celeste. The Trans-Pacific Partnership legislation is probably really monstrous, but can you tell me how many pages there are and where we can go to read okay, not everything. Yeah, that's take your word for what it says, because I think voters need to actually do something really boring and actually go read some stuff. Okay?
They should. The problem is they can't right now. We don't know exactly how many pages the TPP will be because it's not public. And that's one of the reasons why we at the AFL-CIO oppose fast track. And we don't actually have a position on the TPP because we're really critical and skeptical about it. But we don't have a position because of exactly what you said. We can't read it. We don't know for sure. What voters who are interested in what the TPP is or will do should do, if they want to tackle reading a trade agreement and they think they can sort of interpret the legalese, because it is a lot of gobbledygook, you can go to USTR's website. You can look at the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. They call it KORUS for short. And the USTR has said publicly that it's using KORUS as a model for TPP. So you can believe that. You can read studies of what past agreements that are similar to the TPP have done. And the AFL-CIO has a great one called NAFTA at 20 that you can find at aflcio.org/NAFTA at 20. You can also read some actual leaked text. These are partial text in progress of the TPP available at WikiLeaks and with some legal analysis, obviously from folks who are critical of the content. And in the end, the TPP will probably have some things in it that are better than past agreements. The question is it better on balance? Is it good on balance? When you weigh all the possible negatives with any possible positive, you've got to take that as your goal. And what we say is it's not enough to leave a talking point that says, hey, this will create jobs, or hey, this will solve our problem with China. The answer is you have to find out for yourself, which is why it can't be secret, which is why we have to oppose fast track.
Okay, Celeste, we've got about 2 minutes and time for probably one more question, if we can get to it. Sherry Nelson or someone last name Nelson, I can't remember, but it's 872-237. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Hi, I have a quick question for Celeste. Celeste, what makes you think it'll be April 13th that they'll get the fact tracking committee right now? Is that where it is?
Yeah, so the bill has not been introduced, and what we know from press reports and from talking to staff up on Capitol Hill is that Wyden and Hatch are talking. They're both admitting they're talking. They're both saying that they want to come to a deal, and it seems like the deal hasn't been struck yet. So if it's going to be struck, it will likely be struck within the next week before the senators all go home for their spring break. And then when they strike that deal, staff who stay here in Washington, D.C. will use that time during the recess to write out the elements of the deal, finalize the bill, get it in shape to be introduced. And then April 13th is the first day they come back from recess, and that's the likely target date for introduction. Now, this is all, this is not a guarantee. This is not, slated on a calendar and can't be changed, but that's our best estimate right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Celeste. And we are just absolutely on schedule, which I love. I love when a plan comes together. Thank you so much, Celeste. I am now going to right just about 30 seconds till 8 o'clock call on one of our main speakers tonight, our esteemed colleague and the legal brain trust of this entire plan that we've been working for so many years, Lori Wallet, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Lori is going to tell us everything we need to know and then answer your questions at the end of the call after the next two speakers address us. So, Lori, you have the floor. I'm hoping Lori is phoned in. I'm going to make sure Lori should be unmuted. Okay. All righty. I think what I'm gonna do is have the host team double check and make sure that we gave Lori the right phone number. Oh yeah, I think what has happened, perhaps is that somebody shared a different number with Lori. So, could someone? I'm going to go ahead and send Lori a little note, and in the meantime, I think what I'm going to do is jump to our next speaker, and then we'll come back to Lori's presentation. So now I would like to introduce Ben Mansky with Liberty Tree Foundation, and I'm going to ask Tom Hawking to run the slides for me, if you will, Tom. Ben, just cue Tom when you'd like him to change the slides for you. Ben is someone who has been active in organizing the democracy movement for many, many years. He has so many titles that I'm sort of at a loss, but those of you who've been involved in working for the democracy movement and a democracy amendment know Ben very, very well, and we are so honored to have him with us. So Ben, I'm going to give you the floor. I'm going to ask Tom Hawking to move your slides, and we're going to help Lori get her sound working. And Mansky. okay, we must be having a little bit of sound, maybe trouble with everybody. I'm going to double check our soundboard and just make sure there isn't a problem right there tonight. So hang with us, everyone, and make sure that Ben is unmuted. Ben, I think you are unmuted. Can you try this out?
Sure. Let me just.
Ben,
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So if you could just cue Tom Hawking.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So just cue Tom Hawking to change the slide for you, and we're going to help Lori get her.
Hello.
Hello. Are you?
Okay. Who's saying hello?
It's Lori.
Lori. Okay. So Ben, we're gonna jump back to Lori. So
okay.
Apologies, everybody. Well,
I'll go
Lori
back in the queue.
You're going to go back in the queue. Okay, just so that's okay. Just stay where you are. Lori Wallach, Director of Publicism and Global Trade Watch. We just wanted to make sure you guys were paying attention tonight. Okay, Lori, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Liz, for organizing these calls and to everybody taking their time to participate. I don't know what exactly happened. Suddenly you could hear me, but I'm sure happy you can. Thank you for inviting me. I have been given my marching orders of what I ought to cover, and I wanted to start by just reiterating what Celeste said, which is from now until basically Memorial Day is our do or die time. If we don't have success by Memorial Day, it doesn't mean we can just relax. We'll keep going probably through to the August recess. But the point of extreme peril is between now and Memorial Day, and I think we should all plan. The bill is going to go in, and I think we all need to be ready on April 11th when Congress comes back. That will likely see a bill formally submitted. We should plan for that. It is still critical to up the pressure on Wyden and to keep contacting all of your representatives and both your senators and to get other folks to do it, because there are a lot of amazing activists on this call who have networks of other folks. Obviously, the first goal is to keep Senator Wyden from caving in and providing Democratic cover for Hatch's battle fast-track bill. And that is what is at stake, which is the thing that is dangerous is, given Wyden was against the fast-track bill last year, if suddenly he's for basically the same old thing, it gives it the impression that somehow this bill is new and different and Wyden got stuff. And the bottom line is, if Wyden got everything he asked for, as we understand what his demands were, it would be basically like, fixing an ingrown toenail when fast track is cancer. So he's asked for some pretty modest things, and we've already actually queued up the documents. We're going to do it quickly, point-by-point comparisons between the 2002 fast track, the last one that Bush did, last year's bill, and what potentially could go in April 13th. Please, God, no, but with Wyden on it. And the key things that folks need to be ready to take down are, Wyden is undoubtedly going to say he got big improvements in transparency, and the two key points there are going to be, did he get an agreement to make the documents available to the public? That's the decision about whether there's transparency or not. Also, he will likely say he's got new access for congressional staff. It's very important that we frame that for what it's likely to be, which is they will probably formalize the past practice from, say, the Clinton era, where staff with security clearances could see draft text in secure reading rooms. The problem with that is actually it's a big step backwards to formalize that, because right now there is no statutory authority to subject the staffers to national security clearance to see the text. That's just a bad practice. But if the bill now states it, there would now be a new basis for that kind of security clearance requirement. So actually what Wyden may say is a transparency improvement would be a rollback And then the second thing he's likely to say is that he's helped to change the structure of fast track, that there's more accountability to make sure that the negotiators actually have to meet Congress's objectives. And what Wyden, we understand, is asking for is actually something that, were he to get it, would make fast track have less safeguards for Congress than, say, the one in 1988 fast track that they used for NAFTA and WTO, which is to say, if he got what he's asking for, he doesn't fix anything. And the bottom line is nothing that is being discussed by Wyden is anything like what we really need. What we really need is to junk fast track and replace it with a totally new way of doing trade agreement negotiations and approvals. And that's not part of the negotiation. But as we're preparing for April 13th, and if we continue pressuring, maybe it will slide. Every week we get without the bill in is a week for us to win. But if they drop in a bill, we can feel with sad confidence it's going to be basically the same old crap with a few bells and whistles, and we're going to need to basically immediately win the battle of framing what it is, which is the same old unacceptable fast track, and not let Wyden or the White House make it seem like it's something new and different. The thing we've got going for us right now is really amazing unified opposition. The entire House of Labor, folks saw the letter a couple of weeks ago that had all the unions that are no longer members of the AFL-CIO, professional associations like the pilots, the National Education Association. It was just an incredibly beautiful document of the entire House of Labor and beyond unified against fast track. And as well, there has been incredible expansion of the groups that are against fast track to a lot of new allies and friends. It's a very powerful network we have, but there is a very powerful corporate coalition, and the White House is in full tilt. In a way, disappointingly, we actually haven't really seen when they were fighting for the kind of things that we did like healthcare reform. So we're going to have our hands full. When the bill goes in, the most important things to do are, one, make sure you call both senators and your House member first, and get all of your activists to do that, to reiterate, the bill's in, now we see it, it's the same old fast track. Reaffirm you're voting no. They need to hear that right away, because there's going to be a real attempt to say, well, you opposed fast track, but that isn't fast track that we have now. So that's going to need to be done immediately. There are a lot of organizations that have plans to do action alerts. If you need a model action alert for that infamous bill drop day, please email my contact, Elisa Simmons, who's frequently on these calls. Who's probably on this call right now. Everyone knows Elisa, to get model language for emails, plus making sure that with Twitter, with all of our different networks, folks know it's the same old thing. That is our most important thing. The first couple of days after the bill goes in, we're going to win or lose the definition. And again, even if Wyden gets everything he wants, it's going to be the same old thing. The work on making sure the bill doesn't go in really is important, because the closer we get towards basically the deadline where Obama would start to run out of time to be able to pass the TPP, if he got a fast track, makes it less and less appealing for the White House to make such an all-out push to get fast track, which gets us to the second topic. Where are the TPP pawns? Our not allowing fast track to go into effect as planned, as folks will recall, right after the midterm elections, President Obama and the Republican leaders said they were going to pass fast track in the first couple of months of this year. And here it is, maybe in April, if we do our work, maybe later, there is no bill. So we basically now have fast track's absence affecting the TPP talk in a really useful way, which is the other countries are seeing that, contrary to what the White House said, which was to all of our negotiating partners, the Trade Representative's office has said, oh, don't worry, fast track, piece of cake. And after the election, they said, fast track, even easier to get. So the fact that actually it's turned into a total shit show for them, which of course is no surprise for all of us, that it's a shit show for them because we've been busting our butts for all these years. But the fact that all the other countries are realizing, wait a minute, what does this mean? Does this mean maybe Congress and the public actually isn't behind this outrageous stuff the U.S. negotiators are trying to shove down our throats on expanding medicine patents, raise prices, on investor state, or maybe even if some of the public is for it, maybe this can't get through Congress. We could give away all this stuff. And in their countries, a lot of the governments in the other countries are thinking, well, what's worse than having to face wrath at home about giving up our financial regulations or our affordable medicine? Well, the only thing that's worse is doing that, getting the political hit, and then maybe the agreement never gets implemented. So they can't even deliver the goodies that their economic elite might make out of the deal. So us making sure there isn't fast track is our number one contribution to what are really kick-ass campaigns against TPP going on in a lot of the other countries. That said, there is an intense push to finish, and specifically a couple of things we have coming up to keep an eye on out. Number one, if the fast-track bill gets introduced, there's going to be a big PR push to say, see, it's moving, make your deal now. Number two, Japanese Prime Minister Abe is coming to Washington for a state visit, and he's going to be in the U.S. for 8 days in April, touring all over. We need to make sure wherever he goes across the country, and he's going all over, he is greeted with respect, but also making clear that there is opposition nationwide to TPP. That his being here is an action-forcing moment for the U.S. and Japan, maybe to finally make that deal on which all the other countries are waiting to make their deal. That said, already we know 9 chapters are actually closed of the 29. Most of the others are down to the really very big issues that are going to be done at a political level. The good news is at the high-level meeting, the ministerial meeting, where our USTR Mike Froman and his counterpart trade ministers would make those kind of big trade-offs, keeps getting pushed back. So it was going to be in March, and then it was going to be in April. And now no one's quite sure. They're basically pushing it until they see what happens with fast track. There are a few chapters that are still very thorny, like intellectual property. But if Japan and the U.S. make a deal, the rest of the stuff get mopped up pretty quickly, which is why, again, making sure there is no fast track is our best firewall against TPP. Without some certainty on fast track, the other countries are very loath to make any big trade-offs. That then takes us to ISDS. One of the contentious issues is ISDS. And I think maybe the best use of the time on the call is just to review for folks a little bit of the common things that get said by the administration and what the quick response is, and to refer to folks the very detailed rebuttal that Liz sent around that we did take down the trade representative's fact sheet on this question. Now, the amazing great news is that Senator Warren, the other Liz Warren, is really making ISDS a big issue, and she did a great Washington Post op-ed, which folks probably saw, and she's done a floor speech, and she gave a news conference on the issue as part of a release of a letter with 130 U.S. law professors against ISDS. This has made the White House nuts. Number one, she's made the issue really clear and really basically accessible for everyone to get upset about. But number two, they realize that if the rest of the country wakes up to this, it could be really the nail in the coffin to TPP. So the U.S. PR is basically dishing out doo-doo to try and counter it. And here are some of the key things they say, just so folks have the top lines. Number one, they say that the investor state rules in U.S. agreements are different than the rules in other agreements where really bad cases happen. And that is just baloney. number one, the U.S. investor-state enforced agreements have generated their own string of outrageous rulings. Over $3 billion has been paid out to corporations over natural resource policies, land use rules, environmental and toxics rules, financial stability measures, health and safety measures, water use, and more. So number one, actually our existing ISDS agreements have caused plenty of woe. And number two, there's nothing special about our agreements with respect to claims that we fixed them after NAFTA. That's the second USTR claim. We fixed the agreement. So maybe NAFTA was a problem, but in the future, we got it right. Well, there were changes made, and those changes were included in every U.S. agreement with ISDS since CASPA in 2005. We already have rulings under those new rules. And the bottom line, and one of the reasons ISDS is so dangerous, is that whether or not they got the language changes right, the tribunals can just ignore it. And that's exactly what they've done in the two key investor-state cases under CASPA, under the reformed rules, that allegedly were supposed to stop tribunalists from ordering countries to pay corporations for just changing their laws in a non-discriminatory manner. So we have the cases. You can go to our website, tradewatch.org, if you want to get down into the weeds and read about those specific cases. But the bottom line is we made those changes in our previous agreements that USTR is now touting as new and improved for TPP, and it hasn't made a whit a difference because the very structure of the ISDS system means three private individuals who rotate between being judges and prosecutors have no accountability. There's no system of precedent. There's no appeal. They can do whatever the hell they want, and there's nothing a country can do about it. So getting the rules right on the margins of the substance, certainly useful to advocate for, ain't going to fix the structural problems in the ISDS system. It just shouldn't be a parallel system of justice for corporations with private judges held accountable to no one. Number three USTR point is, well, even if the tribunals can be a problem, U.S. law is so amazing. We don't have to worry. We're never going to lose a case, and we haven't. First of all, the fact that we have not lost an ISDS case yet is because our past ISDS enforced agreements have been almost exclusively with developing countries that have few investments here. The only exception is Canada under NAFTA, and all 13 of the concluded ISDS cases against the U.S. were by Canadian investors. And we almost lost several of those in the merits. There's a great law review article about this at the Columbia University Vale Center, part of their law school, where they analyze how many close calls we've had, but for technical, basically errors in the filings, we dodged the bullet. But the fact that we haven't lost a case yet does not have anything to do with the fact that actually, if we did TPP or CAFTA, the TTIP, we would be opening ourselves to unprecedented liability because between those two agreements, 14 of the world's 20th major outward investing countries are involved. So practically, that would mean 25,000 new firms that are based in Europe but have branches in the U.S. would be newly empowered to use investor state if ISDS is in TTIP, thanks Fast Track. 9,000 additional firms would be so empowered from TPP countries. So the bottom line is, it doesn't matter if we've dodged the bullet to date, we're going to have 33,000 new potential ISDS users to attack us if TPP and TTIP had investor state. Next thing they say is, well, this problematic system maybe, but hell, governments can do anything they want. Those tribunals can't make us change our laws. That is a bait and switch argument. No one ever said they could make us change our laws. That's the government-to-government tribunals where they sanction you in cash they put up trade sanctions against you until you change the law. For investor state, yeah, you can impose any policy you want, just the government would have to pay hundreds of millions to keep it. And the most sort of key point on that front is that repeatedly ISDS has been used to chill policy. The mere filing of a case chills a policy. Again, go to tradewatch.org, go to the TPP part of the website, and there's a nice review we did that goes through the chilling cases, the list of cases where merely filing a case or starting to litigate it got a country to cave in and make a deal. So those are some of the biggest issues you're going to hear on ISDS. The facts are on our side, and the ISDS system really can be made on a transpartisan basis, one of the Achilles heels of Fast Track and TPP, and it's up to us to do it. I'm going to stop there and open up for questions.
Thanks, Laurie. I have a question now. Would it be okay with you if we held questions until the end so that you and Ben and John could address them as a group? Because we're right now we're a little bit over our schedule because we have so many speakers. So I'm going to ask Ben and John to kind of speed us on through, and then we'll give all this wonderful time. So thank you, Lori Wallach, my hero, for being patient with us and for hanging with us. Thanks, Lori. All right, and I'm gonna basically just jump right in and say, Ben Mansky is amazing. He's done everything. He's the president of Liberty Tree Foundation. He ran Jill Stein's presidential campaign with the Green Party. He's been with the Green Shadow Cabinet and a host of other things, and is working on a graduate degree at UC Santa Barbara right now. Ben, you have the floor. Just let us know when you'd like us to change your slides.
You bet. And can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you clearly. Thanks, Ben.
Okay, excellent. So, Tom, if you'd go ahead and go to the next slide there. Oh, nope.
Sorry,
I'm back. There we go.
I did it for Tom. Yeah, okay, sorry.
Oh, I've seen work. So I do want to say, first of all, that it's really wonderful to be with such wonderful people. I know many of you through work in the movement over the years. Also, I saw that Nancy Price, who is also a member of the board of directors of the Liberty Tree Foundation, is on the call. And also I'm happy to be here with a fellow Wisconsinite, Lori Wallach, and John Bonifaz. It's really an honor to join you. As you can see, I am with the Liberty Tree Foundation. We are entering our 10th year of organizing, and our objective since 2004 has been to build the democracy movement in the United States. And some of these images represent some of the campaigns and programs that have made Liberty Tree I think a institution of growing importance in the democracy movement. We are co-founders of the Move to Amend Coalition. We have supported campaigns to democratize education with the Democratized Education Network. We have a campaign targeting the Chamber of Commerce, Shut the Chamber. And I just want to make sure that everybody on the call and who is viewing this later on knows about Liberty Tree and has the opportunity to go to libertytreefoundation.org to find out more. Our real objective here is to build a broad but also deeply rooted movement for democracy in every part of American life. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pick up a little bit where Lori Wallach just left off with this question of the ISDS and corporate nationhood. And just to state it in very simple terms, with the investor state dispute settlement process, you're essentially seeing transnational capital and even corporations that operate in one country other than the United States as state actors. They are treated as if they were state actors for purposes of the tribunals. And of course, ISDS processes are common to pretty much all of the trade regimes that have been pushed over the last generation. So you see it in various free trade agreements, various FTAs, seen it from the very get-go with NAFTA, but it's really developed to the point where there's a lot of practice with this process. And I think it's really a statement of the efficacy of the work that all of us have been doing, all of you have been doing, prior sort of movements have done in the past several decades, that if you go to U.S. Trade Representatives' website to see what they have to say about ISDS, they're quite aware of the criticism of this aspect of their trade policy. It's right there at the top of their web page. They really do try to minimize sort of the question of corporations having standing to national governments and, of course, subsidiary governments by extension, by sort of claiming that this is really no different than what happens internally within various judiciaries worldwide. Putting aside the fact, of course, citizens groups and individuals don't have any kind of standing. In other words, corporations really do have more rights than you and me with the ISDS process. There are many criticisms of the tribunal process, and transparency is certainly key among them, but the issue here for our conversation today is what ISDS means for sovereignty and also democracy. Certainly, there is an alliance across the political spectrum where it comes to questions of national sovereignty, with concerns about the TPP and other trade agreements subverting national sovereignty. But there is also a very specific concern, I think, for those who identify as progressives in this country about subversion of national sovereignty, which has to do with the question of democracy. Who is in charge? Are corporations sovereign? Are they the source of authority, or are the people the source of authority? And of course, if you go back to the very origins of this country, for better and for worse, I'll just say on the for better side of the scale, let's recognize that the revolutionaries of 1776 were always clear about who was intended to be sovereign. The Sons of Liberty said, quote, "The voice of the people is the voice of God, no longer the king, but the people, the common people who would have authority that can then be delegated through our states." So really what this means in terms of taking on this attack on democracy on a global basis is that we have to build a global democracy movement. And luckily that is actually happening. I'm going to come back to that at the end of my remarks, but what I'd like to do is go on to the next slide here. And I want to recognize that with the ISDS process and with the trade regime that has been sort of being built over the last 20 to 30 years in particular, we're not seeing something that is completely sort of unmoored from American history. In fact, when you go back, you see that we've had similar struggles throughout American history over the question of who has authority and where does that authority get exercised. So in the late 19th century, in the late 1800s, you saw the expansion of the Commerce Clause, the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, in a way that really benefited the growing power of corporations against the interests and the desires of working people, of the mass of people in this country. And you saw child labor and consumer safety laws and other labor protections. Many progressive reforms were challenged and struck down through the federal courts on the basis of the idea that Congress had broader powers that had been previously understood to regulate interstate trade, and so that really was, let's keep it on that previous slide, please. Yes, please go back. Thank you. All right. I'm just going to keep on going here, but I can see that we're skipping around on our slides. There we go.
I'm going to jump in here and ask anyone who's been promoted to a presenter, you are not allowed to look ahead on your slides because you're moving them for everyone. So anyone who has got presenter privileges, and I made a couple of speakers presenter, if you see that next button, just remove your finger from it and go to the top of the chat screen, and you can download the whole PowerPoint if you want to look at it. But just let Tom run the PowerPoint. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Go ahead,
so
Ben.
We go back to that slide. Thank you so much for jumping in there. There we go. So let's just recognize. Go one forward, please. There we go. Let's just recognize that there is a long history of these types of struggles internally in the United States and in other countries. But in essence, we have lost this struggle in the U.S. over the last 140 years. We have won some major victories along the way. There was a struggle for home rule in many states across the country from the 1870s to the 1920s. We have home rule provisions to protect community democracy, local democracy, basically the ability of local communities to legislate in areas that are especially important to them. That victory was won by the people. We have home rule provisions in many state constitutions, but the courts have again struck down these provisions, effectively nullifying them just through their decisions. There's a great history of this, which I think is on the slide, if I'm not mistaken. But Gaveling Down the Raffle by Damian Morris, there we go, provides a good history of how the struggle over so-called free trade within the United States was fought. I think it's important for us to recognize that in the last 35 years, since the 1980s, we've entered a third stage of the struggle in which the federal courts have created a doctrine called field preemption. They've expanded a existing doctrine of preemption, which is basically the idea that a higher level authority can preempt or shut down decisions, laws made by lower level authorities. They've expanded that drastically over the last 35 to 40 years. And that has been used and is being used on a nearly daily basis now to shut down local laws regulating agriculture, mining, telecommunications, you name it, on the basis of federal supremacy. So it's important for us to recognize that the struggle that we're engaged in to stop fast track and to get a different type of trade agreement globally is also connected to what is happening internally here in the United States. It's been happening for many years. Let's move to the next slide then. Okay, one back. There we go. Okay. There we go. I also just want to really put a fine point on this to say that in the last several years in particular, in this current period of intensified austerity, we've seen community democracy really come under intense attack, with majority-minority communities in particular being targeted in states like Michigan, where Benton Harbor and Detroit and Flint and many other communities have been put under essentially state control. Their local governance has been essentially nullified because they may have local elections, but those officials don't actually have the power to control budgets and to legislate in any meaningful way. So there is a racial dimension to this, which is quite pronounced, and it's important for us to recognize that communities in the United States that are at the front line do tend to be majority-minority, and in fact, majority African-American communities. So I will be happy to put out some information about some of those struggles after I'm done here more broadly. Let's go to the next slide. So this, the question around corporations using higher level authority to subdue the will of the people is not a new one, as I said earlier, and it is important to recognize that the corporation itself was a very controversial entity in the very early days of this country's founding. And that the American Revolution was an anti-corporate revolution. After all, the 13 original colonies were corporations of the crown. The white people who lived in those colonies did not have the rights that Englishmen had in England. Many of them were not, in fact, even considered completely white at the time. And of course, you had the expansion of slavery throughout the colonies. When the revolution took place, it was a revolution, therefore, against colonial control through these crown corporations, and also against British East Indies Company, which was the largest corporation in world history in relative terms. The Boston Tea Party was an act of sabotage that, in today's terms, would be, you might say that it would have cost $20 billion to that corporation. And of course, the British East Indies Company had its own military, its own courts. The experience in India was much more severe, so that's what that other image on the slide represents, than what was experienced here. But as a result, after the American Revolution, there was a deep suspicion of corporations as being antithetical to the new republic and to some of the democratic principles which were rising up. At that time, corporations were kept on a tight leash. For an excellent series of resources on the history of the corporation in the United States and people's struggles against the corporation, you can go to POCLAD, the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy, or POCLAD.org. And there you can find out more about the history of the march of corporate lawyers through the federal court, driving the corporation into the Constitution, essentially a corporate counter-revolution throughout the 1800s, beginning with Dartmouth's decision in the early 1800s, moving on to the more now famous, although some time ago mysterious, footnotes in the Santa Clara decision in 1886, and then a whole series of other decisions that followed, which I know John Bonifaz is going to enlighten us about in terms of where that march has taken corporations in recent years post-Citizens United. Let's move on to the next slide. The corporations find themselves now being able to claim post-Santa Clara some protections under the Constitution and attempting to claim more, but it's also important to recognize that they weren't only moving to the courts, they were also moving through the federal government and through our regulatory agencies as they were being created. So I'd say, from the 1880s into the 1990s, early 1990s, you saw a dynamic in which you had the enlargement of the federal government of the United States, and you also had struggles over who these new institutions would serve. But they serve, the sort of stated interests that the FDA, Department of Ag, and so on were created to serve the interests of people in the United States, or they serve the interests of those they were supposed to be regulating. And so there really was a real concern about so-called agency capture that emerged, especially in the 1930s and 40s in the United States, that the regulated would become the regulators. And in response to that, by the 1970s, you saw the emergence of a so-called public interest movement to take on the problem of corporate capture of regulatory agencies that was, of course, led by Ralph Nader, and which, Lori Wallach is very much coming out of that tradition and actually has played a critical role of sort of moving, I'd say, from that sort of period of public interest work towards working for democracy, which we'll come to in a little bit here. But this is the remaining issue, obviously, of corporate executives, lobbyists, lawyers serving on the in sort of the top echelon of our regulatory agencies. Move to the next slide. In the 1990s, we saw sort of a new development, which is really the corporatization of everything. The corporatization of healthcare, the corporatization of education, both K-12 and higher education, the corporatization of the military through the creation of private military companies, corporatization of water, corporatization of law, corporatization of human genome, where corporations moved through state entities to transform public and also some private institutions into institutions that serve corporate interests that are governed like corporations that operate on a corporate logic. And this has really been one of the key struggles of our time, to the point at which some people have even said we're struggling against the corporatization of activism in the United States. And this has accompanied, the emerging trade struggles that really took off in the 1990s. As essentially the same type of logic that have been used to expand corporate power globally through trade regulation of services, and so on, have also been applied, again, internally here in the U.S. Next slide, please. And then finally, Citizens United. With Citizens United, the FEC, I think it's very important to recognize that this is not simply about campaign finance. I know that most of us recognize that, but I still see it almost on a daily basis. I think sometimes we forget about what the holdings in Citizens United, the FEC, were, and that there were two very important principles that were enshrined in that decision. There were principles that corporate lawyers had been working towards for many years, and it had some success in establishing in law through various decisions, but they had never been stated so baldly as they were stated in Citizens United so clearly. And those two principles, of course, are, first of all, that money is speech, which is to say that capital is protected. The ownership of capital is protected here in the United States, against we the people, that the Bill of Rights is a shield to protect moneyed interests against the rest of us, not just in elections, although that was for the more narrow holding in Citizens United, but there have been other cases in which you've essentially seen the same principle. But secondly, of course, is the doctrine of corporate constitutional rights, or so-called corporate personhood, that those who manage and own capital, they themselves are protected, that they have rights that the rest of us don't have. And, you know, in those two principles that have been driven into the Constitution, we've really seen the driving of class rule into the U.S. Constitution. You know, we have a class of people who have rights that they are able to wield on the basis of the fact that they own and manage major corporations. The rest of us don't have those rights. And I think it's important for us to remember that the Federal Constitution of 1787 obliterated an ancient class. That was a class revolution. They said, we're not going to have an aristocracy anymore. There shall be no titles to nobility in the United States. And in fact, you cannot be an officer of the United States if you accept a title. In other words, you cannot be a knight and be an officer of the United States of America. But now the court has essentially injected a new class into our constitutional framework. So before we get too doom and gloom about this, I want to switch to the good news. Let's go down to the next slide.
Okay, and then as we get to the next slide, I just wanted to let you know we're running a little bit behind here. So if there's a way we can possibly whip through the rest of them, so John Bonifaz will have a little bit of time to talk because we're already into what should be Q&A. We always have such great stuff to talk about, but just asking, okay? Thanks.
I'll do my best. Yeah, I'll do my best. I know we were running late there. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's recognize that that there has been resistance. There has been resistance to the spread of corporatization and to the various trade agreements that took off in the 1990s, and that really, you know, the expansion of neoliberal trade policy did follow on the end of the Cold War, and so with the U.S. becoming sort of the sole superpower for a period of time. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, that meant that what George Bush Sr. and Ronald Reagan had not been able to accomplish, Bill Clinton could, and he was able, of course, to get NAFTA through despite opposition in Congress. But, of course, there was resistance that was built by people like Lori and others of us on this call in the 1990s. And that resistance began to actually have some impact. We were able to defeat the MAI, multilateral agreement on investment. There were struggles over sort of the pre-WTO expansions, pre-Seattle anyway. You saw protests over the free trade area of the Americas in this period, in 1990s going into the early 2000s, and so on. And so as global corporations moved to consolidate their power globally, you also saw global movement of people to say we need to have another world. Let's move to the next slide. And of course, you know, as people began to experience the corporatization of their everyday lives, so where they live, where they work, what we eat, people began to resist, and so resistance could be expected to both these the trade agenda, but also to the corporatization of education, of healthcare, and so on. And there were many efforts in the 1990s in particular to build movements to fight the corporatization of education. And in time, these movements started to come together. And the place they came together, next slide, was Seattle in 1999. There we go. And I think it's important to recognize the importance of Seattle, the protest against the World Trade Organization, because it really was a point in which many of the strategies and tactics that are commonplace today, that are identified with Occupy, with the Wisconsin Uprising, the anti-austerity protests worldwide, they became sort of very visible in Seattle. They were refined in Seattle. They were refined in the years leading up to Seattle. They came together in Seattle, and they have come to define our movement since that point. So in some ways, you can look at Seattle as an access point. And we've entered a new era. Seattle, the uprising in Seattle was a moment that really has defined social struggles in the 21st century. It was the uprising that began this century. And it really was a point at which people began to understand that it's both about economic policy and trade policy, but it's also about democracy. That's what this is all about. move on to the next slide. So there is a broad-based democracy movement in the United States today. That was not the case in 1990. It wasn't even the case in 1995. There is a history to the construction of this movement. It was intentional. It's not just happenstance, but it's manifested in the incredible, not only resistance in the streets, and here you have a picture of Madison, Wisconsin, my home state. People I work with were central. We were central in building the Wisconsin Uprising through the Wisconsin Wave and other coalitions, but also through Occupy and so on, but also in the day-to-day work. I mean, let's recognize that there is a movement for economic democracy in the U.S. that is expanding at a very steady pace for the New Economy Coalition and the expansion of work around co-ops through U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. You see students organizing student unions and going on strike, something they haven't done in generations. You see, again, these struggles over community democracy versus preemption, with people using local governments to provide services that the federal and state governments have withdrawn from. So I'll just end on this note, just to say that there are democracy struggles going on in every sector of American life. Sometimes they come together on a national and global basis when we're talking about trade or when we're talking about constitutional reform. Those types of campaigns can define democracy struggles in different areas. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that this is one of the struggles of our time, if not the struggle of our time. It's not simply about campaign finance. This movement has sort of taken hold in many different areas because it really is, in the end, about whether we will be governed by corporations or whether we'll govern ourselves.
I think that's a great jumping point. Thank you so much, Ben. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into John Bonifaz, who has some things to share with us. And John, just to give you a quick heads up, each of your legal cases has its own slides, so just let us know when to advance, and we'll jump through them. And then into Q&A, if Ben, John, and Lori are willing to hang with us for maybe 10 minutes, and everyone else would like to, I'm willing to extend the call about 10 to 15 minutes beyond the normal time, just so that we can have the promised Q&A. So
great, thank you, Liz.
Sure. John Bonifaz with Free Speech for People. We share your bio with everyone by email to save time.
Sure,
okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate the opportunity to join all of you on this call, and I'm honored to be on it, to be with my friends Lori and Ben as well. Just briefly, I'm going to abbreviate my remarks so we have time for Q&A. Free Speech for People is a national campaign launched on the day of the Citizens United ruling 5 years ago. Same time Move to Amend was launched to press for a constitutional amendment to overturn the ruling and the doctrines underlying that ruling, and to push back in the courts, challenging these fabricated doctrines of unlimited campaign spending and corporate constitutional rights. As Ben highlighted, Citizens United was not just a threat to our election process. It was not just a campaign finance case. It was, in fact, an extreme extension of this fabricated doctrine of corporate constitutional rights. And that is really the link that brings us to this question today on this call, TPP. We're talking about a corporate takeover of democracy, whether it's here in the United States or around the world. And that is what is fueling this growing democracy movement to fight back. The cases that Liz referenced that are going to appear on these slides are ones that we're involved with that are recent examples post-Citizens United of where corporations are trying to claim constitutional rights to strike down public interest laws. And this is an example further of the threat that comes when we assign corporations artificial creatures of the state with the political rights that we, the people, as natural human beings, are the only ones supposed to have. So the first such case that comes after Citizens United that I think many people know of is the Supreme Court case of Conestoga Wood Specialties v. Burrell and Burrell v. Hobby Lobby. These are the cases in which the claims of religious rights under the Constitution were made by corporations and arguing that the Federal Affordable Care Act's rules requiring insurance plans to include contraceptive coverage violated those religious rights. The court did not, in fact, reach the constitutional question of whether the religious rights for the corporations were to be found. It solely ruled under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. But the danger exists, of course, that as a result of that ruling, we are now going to see new claims made by corporations of having religious rights under the Constitution. We filed an amicus brief in that case making clear that corporations do not have religious rights. Their members, their human being members may have religious rights and do have religious rights, but having religious rights assigned to an artificial creature of the state is not what the framers intended, not what the First Amendment's about. The next case to highlight here is a challenge that's happening both in Seattle and Los Angeles to new living wage laws, where corporations are challenging those laws on equal protection grounds, arguing that they have equal protection rights being violated by these living wage laws. In Seattle, there's a effort to phase in the living wage ordinance going up to $15 there, higher than obviously the federal and state minimum wage, and that phase in is for smaller businesses, whereas larger franchises such as McDonald's and others need to focus on having the living wage in effect for their company employees much more quickly. And the claim is somehow that treatment differently to the franchise companies violates their equal protection rights. Now, I'm happy to say that just this past week, a federal judge in Seattle refused to grant a preliminary injunction motion denying, in fact, the corporate claims altogether, at least at the preliminary injunction stage, and the living wage is still in effect, the new living wage law in Seattle, but they're continuing to fight these corporate entities, and McDonald's is helping to lead the way in that case. In Los Angeles, it's about the Hotel Association, major franchises such as Marriott hotel chain that are part of that association. Another case that we're seeing is dealing with the food justice movement, and that's where Monsanto is making a claim in the state of Vermont that GMO labeling violates their free speech rights as a corporation, and other agribusinesses are making this claim. And that right is not even a claim that somehow they have the right to speak, as preposterous as that is, not being actual human beings, but they have a right not to speak. And so therefore, we don't get to know what's in our food. We don't have the right as people to understand the health impacts of what's being put in our food because Monsanto claims it gets to stay silent. It does not have to tell us this critical information on this right not to speak claim under the First Amendment. That's a pending case, another case where we have an amicus brief filed as well as in Seattle. The next case to highlight is out of St. Louis, where Peabody Energy is claiming its equal protection rights are being violated by a proposed citizen ballot initiative that would eliminate tax subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, including Peabody Energy. Thousands of citizens in St. Louis through the Take Back St. Louis campaign, which is our client in this case, have signed a petition, an initiative petition to put this on the ballot to end tax subsidies to fossil fuel companies. And Peabody Energy is fighting this on this equal protection ground along with others. And so far they've prevailed. And in fact, that citizen initiative is not going to the ballot yet, but it is on appeal, and we're part of that appeals process as well. The final case I'd highlight is out of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the second highest court in the country, where the National Association of Manufacturers and other corporate interests are trying to strike down alleged First Amendment grounds, a provision of the federal Dodd-Frank Act and the SEC's implementing regulation of that law, which would require publicly traded corporations that use certain minerals in their manufacturing to either certify their products as conflict-free or disclose the countries and mines that are a source of the raw materials. Once again, we see the corporate claim of free speech being made here, that they don't have to speak, they don't have to reveal if their raw materials, if their products are effectively coming from war-torn regions and the human rights abuses that are occurring as a result of the mining that they're doing in that region. And this is yet again an effort for a corporate shield to public interest laws, effectively a corporate veto over we the people. and so very well linked in a very scary way to the conversation here around TPP. So I think that all of this demonstrates that we need to have continued increase of public consciousness about the dangers of this fabricated doctrine, and that is what has already led to calls for a constitutional amendment to make clear that corporations are not people with constitutional rights. We're joined at Free Speech for People with Move to Amend, and many others around the country who are calling for that very kind of an amendment. There are amendment bills pending in Congress via Senator John Tester, via Congressman McGovern, via Representatives Nolan and Pocan, and you can access a lot of these materials at our site, freespeechforpeople.org, and at movetoamend.org, and you can access our briefs that I've highlighted at that link on the slide. I'll stop there and just say that I think that at the core of what we're talking about here is whether it is democracy that prevails or whether it is plutocracy, whether it is a corporate takeover of the very essence of how we govern ourselves, a promise of a government of, by, and for the people. And that's what's at stake here with this debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And I have to give you the Berlitz School Award for the fastest presentation on democracy I've ever heard, and it was fabulous. So thank you so much. At this time, I would like to invite everyone. I'm going to go ahead and clear the previous queue, just start new, and invite folks to press *6 on your phone, and you'll have just a few seconds, please, everybody, to ask a question of either Lori or John or Ben. Please let us know who your question's for and where you're calling from. We have area code 607 up first, 279. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Victor Tiffany with Move to Amend in Ithaca, New York. The question's for John. Aren't these trade agreements, isn't these a lie? Aren't these international treaties? And isn't, therefore, the Fast Track Promotion Authority unconstitutional? If these are treaties, shouldn't they be ratified by the Senate?
Well, Victor, I appreciate the question. I think Lori's going to be able to answer it better than I, but I do believe that Article 1, Section 8 makes clear that Congress is the branch of government that has the power to engage in determining our trade terms and to determine commerce with foreign nations. And if what we're doing here is essentially delegating that to the executive branch, then that's an unconstitutional delegation of authority under Article 1, Section 8. And that is, in fact, what many members of Congress have already expressed to the President opposing Fast Track, as I understand it.
Thanks, John.
Just on the question if it's
Lori's jumping in. Go ahead, Lori.
Just on the question of this treaty, the answer is basically what's a treaty versus what's an international executive agreement, which is what trade agreements are, is determined basically through various criteria. And we certainly made the argument in the case of WTO that should have been a treaty as a legal matter. However, it comes down to a pretty political question because it depends on whether there are enough members of Congress to say that this has to be a treaty. And in the end, even though WTO, even more than TPP, established an ongoing body, the WTO, that could make new rules, etc., really qualified in a lot of those criteria, it still was voted on as an international executive agreement because there's really no way to get at that question. That said, Congress can delegate to change its rules for any given Congress. What Fast Track does is to delegate in advance for a long time, but ultimately Congress has to decide to delegate that authority. So the political question, which is where we can all make an effect, is we just need to make sure Congress says, no, we're not going to do the Fast Track kind of delegation. And that is a fight that mainly will be in the House. But actually, we have, some ability to getting closer in the Senate. Just as a sort of political twist on your underlying question, we wouldn't want this to be a treaty because the Senate's a bigger mess than the House on these issues. The place we can win is in the chamber that has to face us every 2 years in elections. So both as a political matter, as a legal matter, it's hard to get at. As a political matter, we have a way to win and make sure there isn't this delegation, and that's by stopping Fast Track.
Thanks, Lori. All right, we got a couple more questions. Hands up. All right, so Tony O'Doherty from San Diego had a hand up. Tony, go ahead. You have the floor. Let us know who the question's for.
This question is probably for both Ben and John, but maybe everybody. The fast track and the trade deals it can usher in are clearly in the global arena. So is focusing on fixing the internal political systems or only half the battle? And should we not be focusing as well on how individuals can salvage some vestige of power under globalization? And if we don't, isn't this a big weakness in pushing our cause?
Thanks, Tony. Who wants to hop on that, John?
Sure. I'll jump right in. This is Ben here. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think that is the conclusion that many of us have come to over in recent years especially. And that's why what has happened in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, even preoccupied with sort of the globalization of resistance, with the real democracy movement, Real Democracia Ya, in Spain, and the sort of connections between these various movements worldwide are really essential. I should also say, and I'm guessing that Lori may be able to comment on this, that I have heard from members of the Bundestag for Greens, essentially from national legislators in Germany and from others through the Green Party worldwide, that they wish that those of us who believe that another world is possible would find a way to actually move an agenda for regulating the global economy on a democratic basis. So I do think we need to construct that, and I know that there is work going on the transatlantic front, at least. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ben. All right, we have a lot of hands up, so we'll try and get to all of these folks if we can. 914-964-6917. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, hi, thanks. This is Julie Weiner from Yonkers. I'm active with Concerned Families of Westchester. And we have been studying Jonathan Simon's Code Red and the evidence that there is, in many states of the United States, really no longer a genuine franchise of the people, including Ohio, by the way, that elections are being thrown electronically and that we have no way of verifying the vote in most states in the country. And even in New York, where we have paper ballots, we don't really have a mechanism for a full count of the paper ballots if there's a difference between the hand count and between the hand count and the electronic count. So I'm really asking everybody. I mean, I'm really pleased that you want to work on Citizens United, which is another assault on the franchise. But
who's the question for, Julie? We need to get.
I would like any of them to answer whether your organizations. I'm particularly interested in whether the AFL-CIO is working on the problem of electronic voting and the loss of the franchise.
Okay, why don't we get Celeste to hop in on this just so we can keep moving. Celeste, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here. I just want to take myself off mute. That's a great question, and it would be a different department than mine, but to my knowledge, we're not working on electronic voting, but I can certainly find out. If you follow up with me, then I'll remember to ask. I personally do share your concerns and think that a lot of us sort of on the left in general here in D.C. could probably do a lot more on the issue as it is related to everything as we just heard.
Thanks, Celeste. We've got Elizabeth Lehrer up next at area code 310. Go ahead. Who's your question first?
Liz, it's Lauren Steiner. Elizabeth and I are driving home from Santa Barbara listening to this very informative call. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
So who's your question for?
Okay, my question is for Lori. I want to know if she has personally met with Elizabeth Warren, number one. If not, can she get a meeting with Elizabeth Warren? Number two, if she can get a meeting, would she be able to ask her if there's anything she's willing to do to try to talk one-on-one with Ron White as a fellow senator about his concerns? And number four, if she can't get the meeting, and if she can get the meeting and she's not willing to talk to Ron Wyden, is she willing to go out on the campaign trail, so to speak, and do a national tour with all of our different groups around the country, basically speaking out about this agreement, this fast track, once introduced, because Elizabeth Warren can get pressed wherever she goes. So that's my four-part question.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. So if we understand it, you just want to know, is she going to talk to Wyden? Is she willing to jump on the issue? Is she willing to go to the mat and run around the country talking about it? So, Lori, what do you think? You know her, and can you get her involved?
Well, the great news is she's gotten involved, and what she's done in Investor State is great. And I think there are a lot of folks who have a lot of ideas about more stuff she could do, and I'm happy to pass on those ideas to her staff because I totally agree. She's an excellent asset in this whole fight. And in fact, she's engaged as part of how we're going to win.
Outstanding. Thanks, Lori. So we have someone at 904-728-9059. Let us know who your question's for before we begin, and then we can get rolling with it.
Hi, my name is Cynthia, and I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. And anyone can answer this question, and it may be a little bit off track, but I think it's something that everybody should think about. My belief is that we need a national movement to vote out every incumbent, and people need to take the pledge because that is the only way we can get the special interest out of our government. Because if every incumbent was voted out, there would be no need to run campaigns to get reelected. They wouldn't have to seek money from anybody, and it would just shake everything up. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment on it. That's my comment.
Okay. Who wants to hop on that one? John, maybe? We haven't heard from you yet, I don't think.
Well, look, I think people should be held accountable at the election, in the election process, but I also think we need competition. And the reason why we don't have competition in a lot of these races around the country, whether it be for the Senate or for the House or at the state level even, is because of the exclusionary wealth primary that occurs where people are locked out of the process of even being able to run because they do not have money or access to money. So part of the real problem is that there aren't often candidates to vote for because the incumbent has a cakewalk and very little, if any, competition facing him or her each election time.
Thanks, John. I'm going to jump in and ask Ben to answer a question for me because it's one that's plagued me a long time. I know Ben represented the wonderful Jill Stein, who was on a call of ours very early on in this process, and she spoke so eloquently, and I just kept thinking, if she had run as a Democrat and brought all the Greens over, we probably could have gotten her elected. So is there a possibility, I'm just asking, why don't we get some of the Greens to run as Democrats and some of the independents? And what do you think? Are you wishing now, Ben, that maybe we had run those candidates as Democrats so they could have gotten rid of some of the incumbents we don't like?
I don't know if that's an appropriate conversation for this call. I'll just say I know the Greens wish Democrats ran as Greens, and Democrats wish Greens ran as Democrats, and some Democrats wish Greens and, frankly, a lot of progressives would just go away. So I think it's important to recognize that we're in this struggle together. There are some differences of opinion about strategy along the way, but I think that the reality is that, and I'll just speak personally here. I was active in the Democratic Party as a young person. I was a delegate. I left when Bill Clinton became the party's nominee, and our politics have been corporatized in many ways. So this is my response. Some people choose to fight the struggle within these institutions of the Democratic and Republican parties, since there are moderate Republicans anymore. And others of us have said we need to build our own institutions. But I think what's really important around trade, around the democracy movement and so on, is that you have people who agree on the same principles who are working towards common ends. And so that's to give you a case in point. I could have a rigorous discussion about the question you raised, but I don't want to do that. I want to point to the positive and say, look, with Mark Pocan, you have McGovern, you have Rick Nolan sponsoring legislation that really has been backed by the Green Party for many years. Many of us have close relationships with some of these people. That's the kind of alliance that we have to build for the long haul and strengthen.
all the progressives could come in and take over the Democratic Party, but you're right. That is another conversation for another day.
That's right.
All right. Well, we have someone at area code 415 with a hand up. Go ahead. Let us know first who your question's for and then what it is.
Yes, I think the question was probably for Lori or John. My name is Rabbi Dr. Catherine. The question is it possible at some point that there a class action lawsuit to stop all this nonsense?
Lori, I think first, and then John.
A lawsuit on
A class action lawsuit. Is that possible?
on what?
On the whole, try to stop the fast track with this new fast track agreement going on.
The basic answer, unfortunately, is no. This is one we're going to win by one by one, making sure our members of the House of Representatives, Democrats or Republicans, and right now there are literally only a handful of Democrats who are for fast track in the House. There are small block who are undecided, and that's who we all have to make sure vote the right way. No, that is how we are going to stop fast track. There isn't a litigation strategy that can be successful to stop it.
Thanks, Lori. Okay, we've got a couple more hands up, and we're at almost 15 minutes after. It looks like David Weiss, or perhaps one of the Weiss family, area code 617.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I think we can hear you. You might want to speak up just a little bit.
Okay. Excuse me. My question is for Laurie, but I'm also going to post a second question as I wrap up. Laurie,
one question, David. So we have one more person. Go ahead.
The question will be posted in the chat, and hopefully it's about sovereign wealth funds, and I hope someone will address it. But, Laurie, okay. I fear that massive corporate money can flip more votes in Congress than we can hang on. My suggestion is the veterans and family of active duty military will be outraged that ISDS will surrender U.S. sovereignty to foreign authority. Anyone who's personally sacrificed and seen fellow service people sacrifice will be disgusted. Our political leaders are eager to sell out to corporate interests over values and principles those service people are willing to sacrifice for. And furthermore, I think if veterans call into right-wing radio, they're not easily dismissed. So they may be able to generate outrage among the right wing to torch Congress to oppose this. I just hope someone has the contacts among veterans and military families to take this viral. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, Laurie, I just want to bring this to your attention. And also, Laurie, I would like to ask you, because I have a couple other things I would like to go over, will you take a call from me at your convenience this week?
I can certainly try to put it into the schedule, and on the military families, it's a good strategy, and there are some great veteran groups who are part of the No Fast Track Coalition, both progressive ones and conservative ones.
Thanks, Lori. And then, what we'll do, David, is if you can share your email and phone number with me, I will pass them on to Public Citizen so that they can get back to you. That's all right. All right, now we have, I think it might be Nancy Price up. 512, or maybe it says Mary Ann Price. I was guessing, but maybe it is Mary Ann. 512?
No, hi, this is Carolyn Caffrey from Austin, Texas.
Oh, boy, I totally was off. Go ahead, Carolyn.
I don't know why I said it like that. Hi. Yeah, this is for Lori, or I'll ask anyone else. A couple of weeks ago when Naomi Klein was on the program, I asked her if the corporate inversions that are taking place, where corporations are leaving and setting up subsidiaries overseas to avoid taxes, if that can also be used as a backdoor into being able to list themselves as foreign corporations for the purposes of being able to sue the United States for policies that they don't like, that they can't get done through the legislature here. And the other part of that is I have a friend who's a chief of staff for one of the Democratic state legislators, and she said not to forget contacting state legislators because they're in contact with Congress people all the time and exchange information. And she said it include actually the conservative state legislators too, and ask them why they would want to give this president more power. In Texas, she said they'll follow Ted Cruz's lead, but she's not unbending to pressure from the state legislators either. So those are my two ideas. And see if you have any template letters for state legislators.
So on the corporate aversion, then creating new investor state corporate plaintiffs, the answer is yes. And just one example of that is for all of the Philip Morris investor state attack on tobacco regulation. Philip Morris said it was a U.S. company when it basically set itself up to say investor state, bigger and better, when it commented to the U.S. Trade Representative for the docket on TPP and TTIP. Then its Australian subsidiary sold part of itself to a Hong Kong subsidiary, and then the Hong Kong subsidiary sued the government of Australia in the Investor State Tribunal as a foreign investor, saying that Australia's new tobacco regulations that Australia's Supreme Court had ruled were allowable and not a problem were a violation. Then the company, using its subsidiary in the Netherlands, used the Netherlands-Uruguay bilateral investment treaty to ISDS attack Uruguay's same regulations like Australia's. So yes, all of these corporate structure issues allow companies to basically go back and attack either their home country or numerous countries under different corporate identities. That is why we must make sure there is no fast track. If we don't want ISDS and all these corporate power expansions, stopping fast track is a thing. Your house numbers.
Thanks, Lori. All right. I'm going to jump. We've got maybe one or two more questions, and I think we have to be kind and let our guest speakers go because they've been with us longer than I think they promised to. Nancy Price at 530. Go ahead.
Oh, hello. Is this me? Speak.
Nancy? Yes, Nancy, you're on.
Yes. Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Or Ella,
yes.
Nancy, yes.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Lori quickly. I'm afraid that with the limelight now, with ISDS in the limelight, I'm worried about the regulatory coherence chapter that sets up a bureaucracy to harmonize U.S. laws with the TPP, TTIP provisions in the agreements.
So the regulatory convergence chapters, folks, is a chapter that basically goes not to the substance of harmonizing the laws, it's about the process that countries can use to make policies. And it has a lot of pernicious requirements, like requiring cost-benefit analysis under the U.S. system where, like just for instance, in figuring out tobacco regulation, you have to figure in the cost of lost enjoyment of the cigarette. So we don't want policies that basically would kill the precautionary principle, have those kind of benefits have to be weighed against health costs. And those chapters are a key element of these agreements, but my sense is because you kind of have to know a lot about how policies are made, an easier way to cut to the chase in describing how domestic policies unrelated to trade that all of our families rely on in their day-to-day lives could get rolled back to our detriment. Investor state, especially thanks to Senator Warren, making it sort of more easy for everyone to understand, is a good stand-in for the same set of issues that we could be hit with if we have the regulatory convergence chapters. But not to be a broken record. We don't have to worry about the regulatory convergence chapters if we make sure there is no fast track, because that's our best way to make sure there's no TPP and no TTIP, which is why everybody needs to themselves and to all their networks get everyone ready to have that bill get dropped in, get back to your House member first, and then both senators say it's the same old fast track crap and you're against it. And between now and then, anyone who has any ability to put the squeeze on Senator Wyden, please go at it.
Thanks, Lori. And in case anybody missed that, Lori wants us to stop fast track. Okay. All right. I'm going to go with last caller, Sharon Nelson at 872. Go ahead.
Hi, this question is for Lori. I think specifically regarding when you talk about fast track and trying to keep them from getting fast track, regarding a strategy, I live in an area of Chicago, and my House member kind of wishy-washy. He hasn't come out one way or the other. He's coming across undecided. Not a try.
Who is that? Who is it?
Mike Quigley.
Okay.
He hasn't come out as decided. I've called a couple times. I think they did sort of an Occupy thing in his office last week. I happened to drop that I knew Gene Schakowsky, and Luis Gutierrez, another couple of House members in Chicago who live, in areas of Chicago, represent areas of Chicago, have both come out against fast track. What I'm trying to figure out is how to leverage him to get him off the fence, obviously in the right direction. Are these people, are people close to, some of these areas of Chicago are, they have very wealthy constituents. Are they worried about being primaried if they don't vote the right? I don't see, I was just trying to put myself in his shoes and try to figure out what's going on.
So Congressman Quigley is the only Democrat in the Illinois House delegation who is, I wouldn't put him as undecided. I think that's generous. That man is within a hair's breadth of voting for TP fast track as soon as he gets a chance to. So he is one of those guys, and it's a very, very short list, I might add, who is inclined to support fast track, and that's what he actually tells the other members of Congress. Whatever he's telling his constituents, it's good news, by the way, if he's basically feeling he can't fess up to it in public. That means he's feeling the pressure. But whatever he's telling his constituents, what he's telling other members of Congress is that, he's inclined to support it. However, he is feeling the heat. And the only thing that's going to get him is actually to scare him within an inch of his political life. So at this point, he is on that very list of folks who need direct action, who need people in his office occupying until they're asked to leave, and you decide if you want to leave or you want to get arrested. He needs basically to figure out who that direct action activist is who's going to come up to him and follow him around endlessly the entire 2 weeks. He's going to be back in the district starting the end of next week, this week coming up, at Thursday afternoon. From that point on until the 13th of April, they are back in your territory. They are home. That man needs to feel like he cannot go any place without having someone get up in his face. Because the thing that does make them nervous, including someone like that who considers himself to be in a totally safe seat, is particularly in the context of what's going on right now in your mayoral race, the notion that he could become persona non grata amongst the progressive community. He knows he's going to be crossways of labor. Everyone else getting up in his face in the context of what's going on with Rahm Emanuel right now, scare tactics, basically. Just making clear he's not going to get away with it. Because what he thinks he can do is he can be the Rahm Emanuel congressman who basically can just do the wrong thing and get away with it. And that's what you have to disabuse him of. He needs to know that there will be a price. And part of the thing that is powerful is the corporate side now has started to roll out AstroTurf. They pay for activist organizers to come in. They buy lists of corporate retirees. Companies send out emails saying, if you want to make sure you have a pension in the future, please call your congressman. That kind of stuff after a vote happens gets rolled up and goes away. But we all actually live there. So that is the theme to him, which is this would be an unforgivable action if he becomes one of the literally maybe a dozen Democrats in the entire House of Representatives who's going to betray his entire constituency, the entire Democratic base, and go with the corporations. You have to really put it as it's an us or them. There are no gray lines here. We don't care if it's the Democratic president. It's not about who's president. The policy itself, totally intolerable. You will never live this down. And he's heard the stories of members of Congress who never lived it down. They got haunted until they had that election cycle where something sneaky happened and none of the base was there for them and they're gone. He has to see the preview of coming attractions for years to come if he goes wrong. That's how you get him.
That was great, Lori. Thank you so much. And question, that would probably apply to a lot of these folks. Could we maybe share some of these remarks, maybe some notes from you after the call with folks, and tips for basically making their representative squirm during this period of time?
I would, again, recommend for folks for information on individual members, things you can do to get hooked in. There's great stuff happening around the country through the AFL-CIO, to Communication Workers of America, the Sierra Club, Public Citizens, scores of other groups. You want to get hooked in, drop an email to my colleague, Elisa Simmons. We can let you know if your member of Congress, the House is a problem. If not, we can tell you which senators from your state need a kick in the pants. And by the way, if your member of the House has said they're going to do the right thing, ask them to do a public event with you in your organization. Get it out publicly. Ask them to write an op-ed explaining why it's such a bad idea. Help them become part of the amen choir of public opposition.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lori. And I'd like to just take a moment to say thank you to Lori and to John and to Ben, to Eleanor, Emily Ann, and everyone on the call. This has been a very strong working call. It was the reason we went over our scheduled time, but I think it was worth it to get all your questions answered. I know we left a couple in the queue, but we're going to have to wrap because it's almost 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. So for now, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody. If you have any more questions that you'd like to pass on to the speakers, feel free to email them to me, liz@peopledemandingaction.org, or type them into the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and leave the chat open a little bit after the call so folks can still type notes there. And just to let our host team know, I will capture the chat notes this time and share them with folks, because there's a lot of stuff that's been shared directly with the presenters that I want to make sure that we capture. To let everybody know about our upcoming calls, next week we are going to be very excited to host Robert Kuttner with the Economic Policy Institute, and he'll be talking about It's Not Economics or National Security. He's got some very strong feelings about what's happening with this trade agreement and basically what we need to do. April 12th, we will be featuring Arthur Samuelis with Citizens Trade Campaign. We'll be previewing the April 18th National Day of Action, so circle that date on your calendars, everybody. I know there's some actions also happening the first week of April, but be sure and circle April 18th for certain. And we hope to have another special guest speaker that day, April 12th. On the 19th, which is the week of Earth Day, we will be featuring TPP in the environment with a couple of speakers from the environmental community. And then on April 26th, we'll be featuring Dr. Eric Monasterio from New Zealand, speaking about TPP patents in the global health crisis. So be sure and mark those dates in your calendar. And next week, March 29th, just to let everyone know, Andrea Miller, my boss at People Demanding Action, will actually be coordinating this call because I will be in Los Angeles trying to get Senator Bernie Sanders to join us on our next call. He's going to be making a appearance there, and I'll be meeting with him and some other folks. So wish me luck, everybody, and welcome Andrea, who will be hosting next week's call for us. So thank you, everyone, and signing off until next week in solidarity. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, speakers.
Your conference recording has stopped.
And I'm going to take everyone out of Q&A so we can say goodnight.
Q&A session is over.
You're all off mute, so let's say goodnight.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Aloha.
Thank you. Fabulous. Thank you.
Good night. Thanks.
God bless you.
So the only time we're off is...
Oh, is Liz on the call?
Hey, what's up?
Busy. Jefferson.
Yeah.
Oh, Liberty Foundation? Liberty Foundation? Hello?